Creationism and the study of evolution has been a controversial topic for years now, leaving people on one side or the other.
Controversy? Evolution? Nothing more to say. Unholy roast is on the way. The cringier it is, the more fun it is to say. Evolution has not been controversial at all for a very long time. The mountain of evidence supporting evolution has made it a scientific consensus for a century, if not more.
God created the heavens and the earth within 6 days. Evolutionists believe that the earth is a lot older than what the Bible describes. And plants, animals, humans, they're all a result of a natural progression called evolution.
Just a quick aside, the word evolutionist leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's not like it's a worldview. In fact, the only time I've ever even heard the word evolutionist is specifically from creationists. Its use raises a serious red flag.
Now, I've always been fascinated with the creationism versus evolution debate, and so I've done research on this subject to give you this speech today. Some say that the Grand Canyon is a perfect example of Noah's flood mentioned in the Bible. Evolutionists use it as proof that the earth isn't as old as the evolutionists say that it is. Kent Hovind wrote an article titled, "Is the Grand Canyon Proof of Noah's Flood?" on creationtoday.org.
You said you researched this topic, and now you're citing Kent Hovind? Okay, let me fix your previous statement. You wanted to prove something that you clearly already believed and found anyone and anything that could agree with you.
Hovind wrote that the top of the Grand Canyon is over 4,000 feet higher than where the Colorado River enters the canyon. The river would literally have to flow uphill for millions of years to prove the evolutionist concept. The Bible says that a flood covered the entire earth during Noah's flood, and that the Grand Canyon is obviously proof of where the water drained.
There's almost nothing I hate researching more than geology. I get how this could sound kind of sketchy at first. How could water flow uphill? But let's look at your statement again. The top of the Grand Canyon is 4,000 feet higher than when the Colorado River enters the canyon. You compared the top of the canyon with where the river is. If we instead look at the elevation of the river itself, we see that it starts out at an elevation of 9,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains. At the border of Utah and Colorado, it's at 4,300 feet. The north rim of the Grand Canyon has it at 2,800 feet compared to the south rim at 2,500. And of course, the end of the river is at sea level, so 0 feet. At no point does the river flow uphill. Okay, so I get that you're meaning the water had to cut through the top of the canyon to actually be able to form the canyon. So how could this have happened? The thing to remember here is that land changes. The Grand Canyon wasn't always there, and the Colorado Plateau that the Grand Canyon is part of wasn't always as elevated as it is now. What happened was that while the Colorado Plateau was rising, the river started eroding the land. While it takes a long time for water to carve out a canyon, it also takes a long time for that massive chunk of land to move. Not only that, but the upward change in elevation assisted the river in cutting out the canyon, kind of like putting pressure on a knife when cutting steak or bread or whatever else. Now for fun, let's say that you're right. The Grand Canyon was formed very quickly in some catastrophic event. Do you realize what that could do to our thoughts about the timeline of the Earth? Nothing. It would change nothing. Sure, we would have a different idea on how the Grand Canyon formed, but our idea about the age of the Earth would remain the same. We have so many other things that point to the age of the Earth and the universe as a whole. Radiometric dating, the fossil record, redshifting of light, and being forced to study geology. It all points to an old Earth, an old universe, deep time.
In biology, evolution is the change of characteristics of a species.
Kind of. It's the change of allele frequency over time. Nitpick done.
Charles Darwin wrote a book titled On the Origin of Species in 1859. This book introduced a scientific theory that populations evolve over generations through a process of natural selection. He presented a body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by common descent through a branching pattern of evolution. In the book, It was written for non-specialist readers, and it attracted a widespread interest upon its publication.
This is a really weird point to make. I didn't bother to find out the target audience of The Origin of Species because it just doesn't matter. Evolution is scientific consensus now, regardless of who was interested at the time of its publishing. The people who devote their lives to biology support evolution. Those are the people that matter here, not who was interested when it first came out. Who cares? Also, Darwin proposed what would become the theory of evolution by natural selection. In science, a theory is the highest level an idea can attain. It isn't just something you throw out there because it seems probable or you really want it to be true. Scientific theories are huge bodies of work containing staggering amounts of supporting evidence that explain the mechanisms of a specific feature in nature. For example, some other theories are germ theory of disease, cell theory, special relativity.
According to FactRetriever.com, scientists believe that wisdom teeth in the appendix are leftover equipment from when humans had a more primary leaf-based diet. As the human diet changed, these appendices became essentially useless.
Indeed, vestigial structures would be expected if organisms change over long periods of time. These are just two examples of vestigial structures. There are many, many more throughout the animal kingdom. And they do corroborate evolution through natural selection. Why are you making my points for me? Also, just a quick side note, the appendix still does have a use when wisdom teeth primarily do not.
Evolutionists use transitional fossils also as a proof of concept. In Archaeopteryx, for example, in Darwin's book On the Origin of Species, he spent 2 entire chapters apologizing for his incompleteness of the fossil record. But soon, only a year later, it became one of his main pieces of evidence for his theory. The Archaeopteryx was a transitional fossil. It was a dinosaur and a bird, according to the 4 famous transitional fossils that support evolution article. It was written by Sinead Monterey on Forbes.com.
You make it sound quite shitty that Darwin first apologized for lack of fossil evidence and then worked it into later editions. Darwin indeed was frustrated with the lack of transitional fossils. Archaeopteryx, and yes, it's pronounced Archaeopteryx, was discovered just 2 years after Darwin's research was first published. As the Archaeopteryx perfectly fits his predictions, of course he would add it into his work. His hypothesis made a prediction that was fulfilled almost immediately. Why wouldn't that be included in his work after that? Also, you know this yourself. It's part of the article that you name-dropped. Though in the future you may consider creating a link in your description. Once again though, this supports evolution. What about this is not convincing to you? Just like vestigial structures, you don't seem to shoot it down at all, you're just making points that further demonstrate the fact that is evolution.
Now, the law of biogenesis, as taught in biology class, states that only life can provide life. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's a real dilemma for an evolutionist to answer. The egg comes from a chicken, yet the chicken comes from the egg. So how can there be one without the other? To complicate matters even more, the chicken has to come from a fertilized egg that has the mixture of 2 different genetic strands from both its parents. So the problem of the origin of life and the initial reproduction is a mystery. So that evolutionary science cannot answer.
Hey look, we agree on something. I am right with you. Evolution cannot answer the question of where life came from, because it isn't at all a part of evolution. As stated earlier, evolution is the change of allele frequency over time. This process requires there to be organisms, reproduction, and descent. What you are talking about here is called abiogenesis, how life began. And we don't have a cut and dry explanation of abiogenesis. It is a thriving field right now, where we are constantly learning more and more. I don't see that as a bad thing. The law of biogenesis is indeed taught in biology, as a history lesson of sorts. For a long time, spontaneous generation was a leading hypothesis on how some animals were created, for lack of a better term. Flies, mice, fungi, bacteria were all said to be spontaneously created under certain conditions. For example, leave meat out to rot and maggots would appear, and of course the maggots would breed flies. This was taken down in steps, but the final nail in the coffin was delivered by Louis Pasteur. I'm assuming most of you have heard of Louis Pasteur, or at very least have heard of pasteurization. His experiments demonstrated that even at a microscopic level, spontaneous generation just wasn't true. The law of biogenesis was the theory that replaced spontaneous generation. As I said above, evolution doesn't care about how life began, so it isn't even useful here.
C.S. Lewis's book, Anti-Darwinists, a careful examination of the development of his views on Darwinism, states that a survey by Larson and Witham found that 93% of members of America's most elite body of scientists, the National Academy of Sciences, are atheists. Now, for someone who believes in a special creator, or a creation by a creator, there is a dilemma here. First, God made male and female chickens, which produced the first egg that was fertilized. This is simple for us creationists to believe, but not as simple for the evolutionists to prove.
I'm not quite sure I understand the purpose of this section. Why do you mention that the National Academy of Science is mostly atheist? It doesn't seem to connect to your next point at all, and quite frankly, it doesn't do you any favors. I don't understand what your dilemma here is either. It doesn't sound good for you, though. It sounds like you are blindly accepting the existence of not just any god, but your particular god, and then you are making conclusions based on that assumption. It may be simple for you to believe, or so you say, but you said yourself how starting with an act of creation is incredibly difficult to prove. Why would that be? Because that act of creation never happened. Or if it did, you have to demonstrate it first before it can be accepted.
Conflicts between science and religion will always be there. I was raised on creationist views, and so I'm just going to leave it with a scripture that dates back to years and years, decades ago, in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void.
Wait, scripture goes back decades ago? And here I thought the Bible was so old. The more you know, I guess. There's one other thing I really want to bring up. Let's say that today you disproved evolution. Now, of course, after this you would gain worldwide fame and a Nobel Prize, but more than that, you would fundamentally not change my mind about the existence of God. I am not an atheist because evolution is the proven fact that it is. I am unconvinced that your God or any gods exist. That position does not hinge on evolution. It is completely irrelevant to the conversation and the existence of a god or gods. In fact, I think the only reason that you care is because your particular version of the Christian God is indeed threatened by evolution. If you take the Bible literally, then evolution cannot be true. If you were to accept evolution, it would break your foundation. Now, of course, I could be wrong about that. So let's find out. Respond to me. Tell me what you believe and why. Our channels are both small, really just starting. Let's discuss this. Rather than address family or friends or whatever is going on with those people in that room, talk with me. Echo chambers are good for no one. I'm assuming that what you believe in you think is true. If that is the case, then discussion cannot hurt. Investigation cannot hurt. Because if what you believe is true, it should reveal itself to be true regardless of the challenges thrown at it. I'm leaving you with that challenge. This has been the Unholy Roast, and thank you for listening to my still small voice.